Hello, welcome everyone. Gonna give a minute for everyone to come in from the waiting room. In the meanwhile, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're joining from, feel very free to do so. Hello and welcome. I see a bunch of people are still coming in. I'll give it another minute or so before we get started. Hello, welcome. See, folks are joining from at least 2 continents so far. I bet there will be a few more. Okay, I think everyone has made it in from the waiting room now. Welcome. My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War. We're a global nonviolent network to abolish the institution of war. And I'm so excited to welcome you to World Beyond War's 3rd annual virtual film festival. And this is in fact the finale of the festival. So I'm thrilled that we're together today. Before we get started, let me start with some Zoom logistics. Today's event will run for about an hour and a half. We are recording this event, and so we'll send out an email afterwards with a link to the recording. We invite you all to use the chat throughout to post any comments and especially any questions. We'll call on them later and invite our panelists to answer many of them. If you haven't done so yet, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Captions are enabled for today's event. You can click on the CC live transcript button to enable Zoom captions if you would like to see them. If you don't see that button, you might have to click on the 3 dots, usually at the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen, to find the captions setting. And of course, these captions are done by robots, so please excuse any errors with the live transcription. So this year's film festival theme is celebrating stories of nonviolence. Thank you to Pache Bene's campaign Nonviolence for endorsing, helping to promote this year's festival. And today, day 3 of the festival is about the film Beyond the Divide. We're thrilled to be screening it. It's about how a small town art crime sparks furious passion and reignites animosity left unresolved since the Vietnam War. We feel this film creates a really powerful space for conversation about civil discourse and healing. I want to thank the team at Quiet Island Films for working with us to make the film available for this event, and to our co-sponsors for today's event, the Jeannette Rankin Peace Center, Veterans for Peace, and Preemptive Love. If you didn't have a chance to watch the film prior to this panel discussion, the link will continue to work afterwards for the rest of today, so you can continue to access it and to watch the film later today if you weren't able to watch it before we got started. So today we have 3 incredible panelists with us to discuss the film and the themes in it. I'm thrilled to introduce first Betsy Mulligan-Dague. She has a 30-year history as a clinical social worker, helping families and individuals address challenges in their lives. From 2005 until her retirement in 2021, she was the executive director of the Jeannette Rankin Peace Center. Betsy is a past president of the Missoula Sunrise Rotary Club and currently serves as the chair of the State Peacebuilding and Conflict Prevention Committee for Rotary District 5390, as well as a board member of the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. Thank you so much for joining us, Betsy. And now I'd love to introduce as well Garett Reppenhagen, who's the son of a Vietnam veteran and grandson of 2 World War II veterans. He served in the U.S. Army as a cavalry scout sniper in the 1st Infantry Division. Garett completed a deployment in Kosovo on a 9-month peacekeeping mission and a combat tour in Iraq. He gained an honorable discharge in May of 2005 and began working as a veterans advocate and a dedicated activist. Garett lives in Maine, where he serves as the executive director for Veterans for Peace. Thank you, Garett. And last but certainly not least, Saadia Qureshi is our third panelist for today. After graduating as an environmental engineer, Saadia worked for the government to ensure compliance of landfills and power generation facilities. She took a pause to raise her family and volunteer for several nonprofits, and ultimately discovering herself by being an active, responsible citizen in her hometown of Oviedo, Florida. Saadia believes meaningful friendships can be found in unexpected places, and her work to show neighbors how similar we are, regardless of differences, has led her to peacemaking. Currently, she works as a gathering coordinator at Preemptive Love, where Saadia hopes to spread this message to communities nationwide. I know I speak for all of us, so we can't wait to hear from all three of you, and we're honored to have you join us today. Now I'm going to bring up my colleague, Greta Zarro, World Beyond War's organizing director, to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you, Greta.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and welcome everyone. I think this is the perfect film to be closing out our film festival on nonviolence, to sort of bring it home in a way. We've looked at these amazing movements from India to South Africa and everywhere in between, and then kind of coming home and looking at this notion of sort of interpersonal conflict and nonviolent communication, which can be done, on the family level, on the community level, and kind of scaling up from there. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with our panelists and talk about how we can bridge the divide with people who may not always share the same opinions as us, and how that's okay, and how we can still build a unified movement. So I'm going to start off with Betsy. Betsy, tell us a little bit about the process behind making the film. How did Jan, the film's producer and director, discover your story and go about making the film?
Okay, thanks, Greta. Jan came to our film festival in Missoula with her short film that was about the history of the peace sign called A Circle in Three Lines. And while she was in Missoula, the folks at the film festival said, well, you have to go to the Peace Center. You have to meet Betsy and go there. So she did. And of course, I was telling her about the peace sign that used to be on the hill above Missoula. And her reaction was, oh my God, that's my next film. At the time, as you saw in the film, the pieces were, all 9 pieces were kept with keepers, people who were willing to keep the pieces until they could be reunited, hopefully. And so originally the film was going to be called 9 Pieces of Peace. Part of her due diligence was to ask to speak with people that were against the peace sign. And I knew Dan Gallagher. I knew he was a veteran that was very outspoken against the peace sign. And so I gave his name to Jan, and it started us all kind of in conversation. And I had been trying to start a relationship with Dan for a while. And it was actually the movie, the process of making the movie, that brought us together to actually begin some serious relationship building. So thank you, Jan.
That's an awesome story. The film itself was a process of overcoming those differences. And the film, I felt, was so well done in terms of kind of combining some archival footage, the storytelling, what you could tell was sort of present day footage, and kind of weaving that whole story together.
Jan did an amazing job. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's turn to Garett with the next question, which is, in the film, we see these divisions between veterans and peace activists, and many people don't realize there are a lot of veterans that are in the anti-war or pro-peace movement. And we want to hear from you, Garett, a little bit about your story, how you went from being in the military to becoming a peace activist, what you do with Veterans for Peace, and if you have seen any of these kinds of divisions that were shown in the film.
Yeah, thank you, Greta, and thanks for allowing me to be part of this festival and be on this panel. Yeah, my journey, kind of discovering my own, I guess, pathway to peace, was through my military experience. I had a bit of a foundation of punk rock music and some literature to back it up, but just enough to really allow me to see things critically when I actually stepped foot into Iraq. And I felt really from the first day that something was off, that we weren't liberators or peacekeepers there, that we were occupiers and invaders. And the longer I was there, obviously I can probably point out more than 24 situations that I was in that were critical learning points for me. But it wasn't one thing that transformed me. It was just the collage of just awfulness of serving in the U.S. military in Iraq that really kind of awoken me to what the realities were. Not to mention the fact that all the reasons, causes for war that I was being told by our government and media were starting to reveal themselves as being fraudulent. No weapons of mass destruction, no ties to 9/11, no real earnest means to create that democracy there without manipulation. And it hurt me. And I was developing moral injury quite early on in my experience there, especially as a sniper. I turned against the mission while I was in Iraq. I started a military blog, a mill blog. I didn't even know what the word blog meant in 2004, and here I was writing a mill blog. And eventually Iraq Veterans Against the War formed in the summer of 2004, and I got a hold of them and became the first active duty member of that organization. It was underneath the umbrella of Veterans for Peace, which meant I was a Veterans for Peace member as well, while I was still serving as a sniper in Iraq. When I first came home in 2005 in the summer, I attended my first Veterans for Peace convention in Crawford, Texas, where Cindy Sheehan confronted Rangers there at George Bush's ranch. And I was hooked. I thought that this was a transformational experience for me, really healing some of my moral injury, trying to give karmic balance back into the world and doing something positive and stop more people from being harmed worldwide by US soldiers. Have I seen this sort of conflict before? Yeah, of course. I live in this strange world where I'm supposed to be this representative of all of our country's patriotism. But why wouldn't experiencing war myself be pivotal in waking me up and rejecting war itself? As you see through the movie and some of the transformation you see Dan Gallagher go through, I went through as well, some of it rapidly and some of it stretched out in a long period of time. But I see a lot of the conflicts. I'm not trusted in a lot of circles, a lot of activist circles. Obviously, I'm a perpetrator of violence. I represented state violence against other people in foreign places. So naturally, I don't assume that I'm going to be trusted to just walk into any community and be able to be an activist there. It's like abolitionists trusting a former cop to be in their inner circle and organizing with them. So I see conflicts with diaspora organizations and diaspora groups all the time, where obviously you just have to assume that you're not going to be welcomed in every place and that you're going to have to show up consistently each time before you're really welcome in those spaces. But I think there are growing divides that we have to address even within the peace community, not between the peace community and our the people who are pro-war, because we're being divided right now with the situation in Ukraine and other situations that are driven by either ideology, generational barriers, or other things that I think just still needs to be solved just within the left and progressive circles, much less being able to cross the divide with the right and left or the pro-war and anti-war. So we have some challenges.
Absolutely. And we've seen some of those flare up in the US recently with some of the protests over the past month or so, as you said, kind of divisions within the US anti-war movement in particular. So I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, Garett, with us. And and sort of acknowledging some of the challenges that you face, but also the power too that you have in terms of being able to say that you've seen firsthand the impact of this and you can speak to the immoral nature of it. And let's bring Saadia into the conversation too. Saadia, I immediately thought of you when I was organizing this panel because of the work of your organization, Preemptive Love, which I think aligns with this conversation so well. The messaging that Preemptive Love uses about loving your enemy, about making peace in a divided world. And so I'd love to hear from you a bit more about that work, and in particular, your title, a gathering coordinator. What is a gathering, and how does that bring people together from different backgrounds?
Thank you so much, Greta, and everybody here for being on this call and willing to learn alongside us. So, like Greta said, I represent Preemptive Love, and we are a global peacemaking nonprofit. We've been around for 15 years, but in the past 5 years, we began in Iraq, actually Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and now we're actually doing work on the Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico border, and we're doing community work. So I represent the community team, and the community team really helps encourage peacemakers to take that next step to bringing peace into their own communities, right? So I'm a gathering coordinator, and what that means is that I help two people who are intentionally different get together and lead a group of people in their peacemaking journey. So what that intentional difference can vary from person to person, place to place. My gathering here in Oviedo, Florida, our line of division was religion. So we had Christian, my co-host was a Christian, a pastor's wife, a pastor's daughter, and she brought her Christian friends, and I brought my Muslim friends, and we got together and created a community outside our little silos and bubbles. And so from there, we started out with one gathering in little old Oviedo, Florida, and now we have gatherings all over the world. We have about 40. Majority are in the United States because we feel like there is a huge need in the United States to bring people who are different together. And our co-hosts vary. So we have a police officer leading alongside his friend that is a Black mom. We have a civilian leading alongside her friend who is in the military. We have, people who vary in age. We have a senior citizen leading alongside a millennial. And we believe that through intentional, consistent conversations, you're able to build that larger community to where somebody in my co-host community is hurting, I feel that pain too. Or if something happens in my community, she's going to show up for me. So we believe that through these lines of division, we're able to foster dialogue and conversation. And that's what the movie was about, is about having those intentional deep conversation where it is a little uncomfortable, but you are showing up with your best foot forward and you are believing the best in people. And that's how we are trying to spread peace. One person at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one household at a time. And we feel like this is the way any person can do it. Like I always say, like, if I can do it, anybody can, because I am very like, I don't like talking in front of people. I don't like uncomfortable conversations, but here I am. And I feel like if we are encouraging each other in these communities, with these communities, that we're able to, promote peace.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, as you're talking, it's really, the word that's coming to mind is humanizing the other, right? Having that personal connection. It's much harder to want to go to war or something if you feel that personal connection. So I want to go to a few questions sort of that come from the film, that are inspired by the film, but then open up some sort of broader movement building questions for us to discuss. And the first is directed towards Garett, but then anyone else can also chime in. In particular, how in the film, Dan talks about the importance of providing respect to veterans, thanking veterans for their service. And kind of this whole conversation reminded me of the debate between the red white poppies. We don't really use that in the US, but in other countries for Armistice Day or Remembrance Day, which is November 11th, Some people wear the red poppy flower on their, jacket, which is to honor the soldiers. And then there's this growing movement to wear a white poppy sometimes next to the red poppy or instead of the red poppy. And the white poppy is kind of opening up this broader conversation that, we want to honor the veterans and we want to give them respect, but we also want to kind of broaden the conversation to talk about peace, to talk about the holistic impacts of war, the victims of war. And this has caused a lot of controversy, just the white poppy in and of itself. And that's just a symbol, I think, of these divisions that we're talking about. So the question for you, Garett, is, how can we kind of strike this balance where we're ensuring that veterans feel respected, but also opening up this broader conversation about the other impacts of war?
Yeah, I mean, with everything, just acknowledgement goes a long way. Sometimes when you fail to acknowledge one aspect, it feels like you're not grasping the nuances of how complicated some of these situations are. There's this blanket respect for service members in the United States for certain that just is always kind of strange to me. When I'm just thanked for my service. I went to the VA 2 days ago and I must have heard "thank you for your service," God, maybe like more than a dozen times that day. And it just, that kind of gnaws on me a little bit because I feel like it's just lip service and people aren't really thinking about what to say. They just don't know what to say, so they say that. So I think it's a complicated situation all around. When you design something like the red poppy to symbolize veterans, and somebody uses a similar symbol to represent something else, with failure to acknowledge the first one, it feels like you're actually opposed to the first use of the poppy. And that's usually not the intention of somebody who's actually wearing the white poppy. It's just one of the consequences that occurs. So, I think kind of a bad example is like Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Obviously, there's a problem with somebody who says that after somebody says Black Lives Matter, because it seems like you're diminishing or undervaluing or gaslighting Black Lives Matter. And I think a similar feeling is with the poppies, but maybe wear both, or maybe understand where it comes from, because poppies is a flower that grew in no man's land in World War I. It was one of the few plants that still grew in that toxic, destroyed environment, and often from the fields where so many dead lost their lives in World War I. And I think the perversion of creating Veterans Day out of Remembrance Day or Armistice Day, a day that we're supposed to reflect on war and remember the horrors of war, to a day that's been nationalized and really manipulated to be a pro-war movement that just recruits more kids to the slaughter, is just tragic. So I don't wear either poppy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that sort of context, Garett. And Betsy, maybe you have some responses on this too, because in the movie it shows how you're trying to strike this balance too, like when you donate the hats and are trying to kind of make the connection with the veterans.
Yeah, I think thank you, Garett, because for all the work that you're doing and your words. I think when you think about looking at the impact of war, veterans are one of those impacts, and not necessarily thanking for their service, but understanding that they have given some service, some of their time and their effort, and seeing them as human beings and understanding that we have things in common that we can talk about. As Saadia said so well, peace happens one conversation at a time, and being willing to put ourselves in those conversations, seeing each other as human beings, not ideologies, I think it is important. I think, you know, in the film, and for me, for my history, I wanted so to have peace be a movement of bringing people together, so to create that space where people could talk, to come to understand and respect each other and learn from each other, and not be kind of an us and them sort of situation. I tried for a long time to make a connection with Dan, to make a connection with other veteran groups. And I think that's one of the things, is it does take time. Relationships take time to build, and you can't always, you know, you keep the door open, but people don't have to always respond right away. So it is about being willing to stay in the conversation and keep the door open and see other people as fellow human beings, and be willing to be in conversation with them. Recognize that a veteran is more than just a veteran. They're a person that lives in our community and has other connections with us. So yeah.
I think that's a good segue to our next question, which I'll direct to you first, Saadia, and then anyone can answer after that, which is that, you know, as we're kind of talking about how to bridge these divides and have conversations with those that we have differences with, it can be challenging when we have very strong opinions about certain topics. And in particular, the image from the film that was sort of burned into my mind was when Dan talks about the baby killer sign, and how when he's coming off of the bus from Vietnam, the first thing that he's greeted with in the US is an image of this protester who has the sign baby killer that's dripping with sort of fake blood in the letters. And he says that the hatred in the protesters' eyes was more than he had seen in the hatred of those in Vietnam that he was fighting. And so it's like, as we're trying to kind of bridge these differences, you know, how can we kind of acknowledge our, what some would say, righteous rage, our righteous rage about the injustices of war, about the wrongdoings of our government, and channel that rage into effective activism without alienating others or coming across, as that protester did, as sort of violent or combative ourselves.
Yeah, that incident that he spoke of was really eye-opening for me, because I can only imagine how he felt. And that just shows the power of storytelling, right? The way he explained it. But I also feel like rage is healthy and it shows that we care. I feel like worse is apathy, right? Because rage keeps you in the game, right? But how do we channel and direct this rage? Specifically being enraged at a veteran, we all know that it's not going to bring about peace. It's just that it makes yourself feel good in the moment. And then that's like where your ego is, right? And that's not, you're not there for peace. You're there to serve your ego. And often we know that a veteran is a part of a system and culture that needs to be addressed and needs to be changed. There's an example, and this is like a total random example that I feel like doesn't even have any value, but it's something that happened to me that I really reflect upon, is so when my daughter was graduating, I would get these random like spam calls, right? And one time I'm like, oh, let me just answer it, right? So I answer it, and it's somebody from the ROTC or Army or Navy saying, oh, would you like your daughter to enlist? I see she's graduating. Would you like her to enlist in the Army? And I'm like, let me just talk to you for a minute, you know. And so I started going on about, you know, peacemaking and peacekeeping, and how I come from this lens of where I don't think war is the answer. I don't think militarism is a good thing, you know, globally and locally at every level. But he showed up in such an honoring way where he's like, oh, I understand. So like I was actually taken aback, like, why isn't he like being angry at me? Like I'm kind of telling him everything opposite of what he truly believes. And he was so kind, and so like he was very honoring in my dignity, the way he let me speak my truth. And I mean, I invited him to my gathering. I'm like, oh, come, I would love to hear your perspective. I know that you come from a different walk, a different, you know, lived experience. I would love for you, for my peacekeepers in my circle, to hear your story. He said he would come, he didn't come, but that's okay. But the point is that they're a part of the system and culture that I am not a part of. And until I hear their story, until I really understand their story, I will never be able to take, to take a footstep towards peace. And I think Betsy mentioned it, like the key is to humanize the person in front of us, and not to ourselves. And that's the thing, like when we get entrenched in our silos, then we are more prone to becoming radicalized. We are more prone to becoming polarized, because all we're doing is feeding our opinions that we already know, that we feel like is right. So as seen in the movie, there's so much power in hearing each other's stories, being willing to listen with an open mind and an open heart, and realizing that there's so much nuance in this. Like for me to sit to say that somebody's a baby killer, like I am missing 98% of the story of what that person did. So that's how I saw it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting what you said in terms of how the person on the phone responded to you and said, I understand, I understand. I feel like sometimes it's hard to say I understand, because people assume that means I agree. And the difference between I understand and I agree, I don't know if that comes up in your gathering circles or in the nonviolent training you do.
Yes, definitely. And our name is Preemptive Love. And when we say preemptive love, it doesn't mean that we do agree with everything, but we love despite that. We show up and listen despite that. We put our biases aside when we go into these hard conversations.
Absolutely. Garett, let's bring you in and hear your response to this question about channeling our rage into effective activism, and maybe, especially through the lens of VFP that does incredible activism across the country and around the world. How do you balance that when there may be sort of very personal, emotions kind of stemming out of people?
Yeah, when I first got home from Iraq, definitely I was organizing from a position of rage and vengeance and anger towards being betrayed by my leaders, by being betrayed by my culture and my society. Being lied to about the myth about who I was as an American, from the point of birth, being raised around these American myths that crafted me into this soldier, basically, this murderer for our government and for capitalism. And I came back and I was mad. It took me a long time to start working through that and start organizing from a place of peace and love, from organizing from a place where I didn't want people to be hurt anymore. And eventually I didn't even want the people that I blamed for my actions. I didn't want them hurt anymore. I wanted the harm to end, and I needed to come from a place of love to organize that way. And when I started dealing with one-on-one relationships with people from that standpoint, it became much easier to connect with folks, to not use absolutes, to not to meet people where they are, but not leave them where they were. And that's one of the most difficult things I see in movement spaces, is folks unwilling to compromise on their messaging just to be able to reach somebody. There's so many folks that just want to be right all the time and are so firmed on whatever their beliefs that they will instantly be categorized as a conspiracy theorist or a tin hat by regular people that might be reachable if you only find some common denominator that you connect with them with first, before you start educating them on the complexities, because it's scary to peel away that curtain, especially for military veterans. A lot of us, the one thing that's saving our sanity is by believing these myths. And if you tear all that down immediately, it's very shocking and hard for a lot of veterans who've been betrayed and are leaning on the hope that anything that they've done is for some sort of good cause or for some sort of nobility in the world. So there's certainly some challenges. and not every soldier is patriotic. I joined for a GI Bill. I was poor. I was working 4 minimum wage jobs trying to make ends meet. And I was sleeping in my car, and I didn't join because I was a patriot. I didn't join because I loved my country. I didn't know how I was going to make it into a college classroom. So, everybody has a different story that joins the military. So, just like the assumption that somebody's a baby killer that served overseas, there's a lot of assumptions that we can make that can be flat out wrong when you're dealing with individuals and their complex stories.
Absolutely. And the story that you shared in terms of how you came into the military, it's very similar to other stories that I've heard. And our former board president, Leah Bolger, she was an art major, and it was, it was similar. She said, what am I going to do with an art degree? And that's the story of a lot of people. It was really an economic reason why they joined the military, not because they necessarily believed in it. And Betsy, let's bring you into this conversation too. I mean, we certainly saw a lot of rage and emotions flying with the peace symbol in Missoula. And how did you deal with that and kind of channel that into, effective activism and not just a confrontational symbol?
Well, I think one of the things that shows up here is just the danger of labels. It is so easy for us to put a label on something and then write it off. It's neatly sewn up in a little box, and I don't have to deal with it. But to me, that's the easy way out. And we don't make peace by taking the easy way out. We don't make peace by staying in our silos or talking only to people that agree with us. We definitely, the label, this is such a scene for me in this film, because the power of thinking that you can forward the idea of peace by attacking another person is just, it's unbelievable to me, that people would think that, and yet we do it all the time. By putting labels on people, by demonizing them. I think for me, effective activism has to include dialogue, has to include the space where different perspectives are respected. I think as a country, some of our best decisions have been when dissenting opinions were heard and expressed, and people were willing to learn from them. And we have moved away from that to where we got this kind of us and them, and that's not productive. The productive part is where you come to know each other and each other's perspectives and are willing to build some understanding around that. So I feel bad for the people who felt like peace was advanced because of those signs attacking other folks. And I hope that we continue to learn a better way.
Absolutely. And this is a good segue into the next question. We'll kind of go around the horn again. So Saadia, you're up first on this. And it actually, Garett, you were sort of bringing us in this direction when you're talking about messaging and, how we can use appropriate messaging to both get our point across, but also bring people in. And at World Beyond War, that's something we're trying to do. Like, we're trying to find, the common ground for us is those who can come together and agree on war abolition. And they might come from all different aspects of the political spectrum. They might not agree on 50 billion other issues, but they can at least come together on this issue. But one thing that we do here is some pushback sometimes about the use of anti-war messaging, and that's too negative to say anti-war. We only have to use positive pro-peace messaging to bring people in and not alienate people and not be so negative as we're talking about. And at World Beyond War, we want to use both, and we actually have an article on our website that makes the case for why we use both anti-war and pro-peace. So Saadia, starting with you, of what is your opinion on all of this in terms of how do we best frame the movement, quote unquote, to bring people in?
So when I was thinking about this question, I was just like, war is a reality. It is there. It's been there. And I feel like that's something that we can't shy away from. And we can't always say peace, 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 because peace has taken on this like abstract term. It's so abstract, it's so pie in the sky, it's all rainbows and unicorns. So I think it has to be both and, like World Beyond War has done and shown us so well. And you really need to meet people where they are. Some people really resonate with facts and figures about the anti-war movement, about the militarism, about how much money we spend, our tax dollars go towards this war machine. And some people resonate with love, with preemptive love. And I feel like that's me in most cases. But sometimes reality is reality, right? But the solution, I feel like it's going to take a lot of work, whether it be anti-war and pro-peace. It takes grit, it takes determination, it takes courage from both sides. And that's the thing, when we talk about peace, people don't think about grit or determination or bravery or courage. So either way, we really need to posture ourselves when we engage in these conversations to show up with compassion and kindness and love. So that's how I perceive it. I really believe it has to be a both and I really believe that we need to learn from the story in the movie about the baby killer, right? Like that is not language that we would ever need to use or want to use when we are trying to seek this anti-war movement.
Thanks, Garett.
Yeah, just trying to absorb some of that. I think there's a lot of great stuff there. I don't know, when organizing veterans, I have to be super careful because obviously there's only a small percentage of veterans that are, that already see things the way I do. So I run the risk, and I've organized badly. I've had one-on-one conversations with veterans where I definitely did it wrong, where I believe that through basically their defensiveness and the way I handled the situation, possibly radicalized them in the opposite direction that I intended, right? And you can easily do this with anybody. If you turn them off with your messaging, they could become so reinforced in the opposite thing that you've hurt the peace movement in general. You've hurt your efforts to create a more peaceful world because you've rejected this person. They didn't feel welcome in your circle, and through their defensiveness become so radicalized and extreme that they could very well, join like a white nationalist organization where there's plenty of military veterans going to right now. It's a constant fear of mine. So I think I try to be very, very careful in some of my communication with folks, because I want to attract as many people as I can to me versus, giving them a chance. And it's difficult. I saw this question in the chat a little bit about kind of boundaries and how do you reach the most extreme people, and is there a point where you don't engage? And I've stopped trying with the most extreme people. Like if I can't reach them, like I'm not going to waste my time. It does me no good going through the exercise of trying to reach them when all it is going to make me angry and compromise my position of peace and just create some sort of like violent argument. It's not worth it to me just to be right. It's worth more of my time to find the people in the middle that I think are reachable and try to grow my circle larger.
Yeah, that reminds me of some advice when I was working with a former organization, Food and Water Watch, and we'd collect petition signatures just on the street. And kind of the advice was, yeah, don't engage in really lengthy arguments. It's not worth your time. Like just, in a way, it almost seems counterintuitive. We don't want to just talk to those who agree with us, as we're talking about today. But at the same time, it wasn't really effective for us to, when we could get 10 signatures from people who, as you said, were maybe on the more moderate, and we could kind of have a conversation versus spend 30 minutes having one argument with someone. And Betsy, let's bring you in on this. Any thoughts?
sometimes I think it's about planting seeds. And so if you open that door, as you did, Garett, numerous times, and don't necessarily stay to engage or actually convince anybody of anything, but you've planted some seeds. And I think that is important to our work. I think one of the things is we need both anti-war and pro everything else that builds peace. I have been connected with the Institute for Economics and Peace through Rotary, and they have a concept of negative and positive peace, negative being the removal of violence, which we definitely need, but positive peace being about building with 8 pillars of positive peace that they've outlined, with good government and free flow of information and respecting the rights of others and lack of corruption, 8 different pillars similar to that. And so it takes everything, because those pillars, the work that we do in the community builds a community that is more respectful and more diverse and more welcoming, so that once you can take violence away as a solution, there's something in its place. We can't just say no more war. We have to have something that will encourage community building and respectful interactions and respect for diversity and neighborliness, like Saadia is doing. We have to have both of those things. So it's a fine line to walk between staying anti-war, but also opening the door to hear other perspectives and being willing to listen above all, and respect others.
Absolutely. Challenging conversations that we're having today. I'm really glad to be talking with you all. And thank you everyone for all of the comments and questions coming in from the chat as well. I'm going to start pulling some of those from the audience. And one is sort of, a few people asked similar questions along these lines. And we've been talking about, the messaging and not directing hate towards the veterans, towards the soldiers. But then some questions are saying, but what about the leaders, those who direct the soldiers, or what about the institutions that are behind all of this? Like, person gives an example of Nestle and the harm that Nestle Corporation has done around the world. So do we, are we able to use sort of negative messaging towards the institutions and the leaders, but not towards the individual? Or what are your thoughts on that? Anyone can just chime in.
Well, just off the top of my head, one of the things I think the strategy is very similar. Do we attack those leaders of Nestle or government or other corporations, or do we start the conversation as a conversation, a dialogue where we are respectful and open to learning something? One of the things I always say is we have to let go of being right in order to come to that place where we potentially might learn something. We might open our minds and learn something. And if we're so set on the other person being wrong and us being right, there isn't anything possible to do. So I think whether it's a person or a corporation, there are ways to say, I don't like what you're doing, that open the door and start the conversation, and ways to say it that shut the door down and stop the conversation. So I think we need to learn how to have conversations that are open-ended and positive. And I don't know that we teach that well enough to each other.
Yeah, Garett, go ahead.
Yeah, I think sometimes people just need to vent, and if it's serving you and your community somehow to like be mad for a little while, and you want to do an action that expresses that anger, and I think if it's not directed towards individuals and like institutions and policies and things like that, you're not really like anti-war is not hurting anybody. You're not talking about an individual when you're talking about anti-war. You hate war. That seems completely logical to me, and it blows my mind. That's still kind of a radical position to not like war. We live in a culture of war. That's a reality. We live in a capitalist culture of war. To break that, to change that, it's going to take a lot. So when you're organizing events and you're doing things, think about why you're doing those events and maximize what you're doing about it. If your goal is to attract more people to you and, build a collective, like, maybe you change the way your event is. If it's policy driven, change your event so it maximizes the impact of the event you're trying to do. If it's a community building event, like sometimes I see so many people out there doing vigils all the time, peace vigils, the first Friday, and a lot of folks get burnt out because they don't feel effective. Well, if it's, what purpose does it serve? Is it community building? Then add music, add food, like make it fun, give it a reason for people to come out and enjoy each other and feel good about the community that they have. And that the fact that they share like views around a certain aspect, whether it's anti-war, peace. So I think your messaging kind of correlates with what your current effort is, and they should reflect upon that.
So let me go to another question then from the chat, which actually, Garett, you had referenced earlier, which was a question sort of about whether there are any boundaries or any lines, any cases where, we wouldn't want to have dialogue with someone because they violated a certain principle. Yeah, any thoughts on that? Anyone can chime in. Just feel free to unmute.
I think there is a line. I really do, because I mean, the trite phrase of you can't serve from an empty cup. If your cup is being so depleted to where you are creating harm for yourself by engaging with a person who is like totally, off the right or left or whatever, you're not serving anybody, and the point is to use your efforts to promote good, right? So I feel like there is a line, and I think, I don't know if it was Garett or Betsy who said that, you're more likely to engage in a conversation, to have a meaningful dialogue with somebody that's kind of in the middle, with those type of people. The people who are on the far left or far right, they're not going to change their mind, but it's that planting the seed. And part of me, like, in our gatherings, sometimes we do get a little bit of an echo chamber where we're kind of agreeing on most things. About 80% of the things we kind of agree on. But my hope is that just by me telling my story of what may have happened to me, or how I perceive the world, that story carries to the person who is in the middle, who knows the person who is on the far right or far left, right? Like, so when the person says on the far right, peace building is dumb, that person who came to my gathering and say, actually, I'm in a peace building group, and this is what I learned, and I heard the story of this person. And so I feel like that opportunity to engage with that type of person who's on the extreme is an indirect, like a byproduct of my gathering, right? And I know firsthand that people who are extreme don't want to talk to me, right? Like, I have tried and tried. I have neighbors, I have who just don't want to engage. But who will engage is a person who's right next door, who has a cup of tea with me, who talks to the guy who's extremely right or left. So and that's just from personal experience.
I think that is so right, Saadia. It's you have to you plant those seeds and things ripple out, and you don't know who you're touching, and what messages you're getting out to who. I would caution, though, the concept of labeling someone as too far right to Like it's so easy for us to say, oh, I'm not going to write to that senator because he's a different political party than me, and he won't like what I say. You have to keep trying. And at some point you come across the line that says, well, okay, I've done what I can, and any more is not going to be productive for me or whatever. I'm just going to go a different route. But I think you have to try. I don't again think we can write people off as, oh, they're not going to agree. They're going to disagree. They're a veteran. They're not going to be for peace, whatever label we tend to put on people and put them in a little box. I think we have to move away from that.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. You'll notice that in the ramp up to any war, the first thing that starts is the othering. They try to other people and create divisions and, build stereotypes and demonize folks. And we do that every day, on the street. If we could challenge that in ourselves, I think we've won a huge battle. But that also doesn't mean that I'm going to allow somebody who's toxic or has bad behavior into my circle to do incredible amount of damage and harm just because I'm trying to be open-minded or trying to win somebody over. There's certain spaces that I still hold as sacred, and I'm not going to label somebody and cast them out because of some identity they have. But if they have poor behavior or toxic behavior, they're not going to be welcome into my circle. That also says that sometimes you need two methods. You need to have, the community that you have trust in, that's a safe space that you can organize from, and you need a way to onboard people so they can become educated and to learn and be called in without damaging that safe space. So it's a hard balance to learn how to do that and create those boundaries.
Absolutely, that's such an important point. Looking through these comments, there's some really insightful comments and feedback coming through the chat. So thank you everyone for all these messages. And I want to read one from Maxine, who says, I see the value of dialogue in the kinds of situations we've been talking about. However, dialogue is sometimes touted as a cure-all, even when changed policies and actions are needed. An example is with the Israel-Palestine conflict. There has been dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis for decades. It's not getting anywhere. Israeli policies are worsened. What we need is not necessarily more dialogue, but meaningful change. Yeah, difficult question. Any responses to that?
That's a very hard question, just because I do have like my best friend's Palestinian, so I actually hear a lot of the things that happen firsthand. But I also feel that there's a lot of peacemaking work in Israel-Palestine that is going on right now, and a lot of it stems from having dinner together. Like, I know, and it seems like such a simple solution, but I feel like that is one of many solutions that could help promote peace. I also feel like in America specifically, the way that we have funded the tensions there, the way that, the way that we have given so much money to the region, and that's our tax dollars. I feel like we need to, voice our opinion to our senators and what have you. And I also feel like, there's a power in our own dollar. Like, if we know that a company is, starting illegal occupation of certain areas in Palestine, that we, we boycott them. So I feel like those are methods that I know I try to do. And I know it's a like years and years and years and decades of problems. And like you said, dialogues that haven't come to fruition. But I just try to think of what I can do specifically, and those are the things that I try to do.
Yeah, I'm a white dude, an American, and I'm going to trust my Palestinian activist friends to know what's best for Palestine. And I hope that includes that the dialogue never ends, but I do agree that there needs to be other strategies too. So I'm going to follow their lead and do what they ask me to do and support them as best I can.
Thanks. And I want to bring in my colleague Rachel on this too. Rachel's our Canada organizer and has done some Palestinian solidarity work. So Rachel, any thoughts on this question?
I love this question. I think it's so important. I think Maxine says it exactly right in terms of talking about dialogue as a cure-all. I mean, nothing is a cure-all. Dialogue is important, but of course, dialogue is not the only tool we have. And to be asking people who are literally having their homes bulldozed or having bombs falling on their head, like, oh, you need to turn to dialogue like that. It's not the time for those people. Should other people be engaging in dialogue around this? Absolutely. Do I work towards dialogue in my own community here in Toronto between Jewish communities, Palestinian communities? Yes. In a war zone, in a place where people's lives and bodies are up against a powerful military force, like that's not the moment of dialogue. And that's for other places and other moments. And I think dialogue also always needs to take into account power differentials. I often do work where I am confronting, for example, CEOs of companies, and I do a lot of mining and justice work as other organizing work that I do. And often I'm bringing people from a community where there's been a mine to meet with CEOs of companies or to sometimes confront those companies. And it's always the CEOs who are saying, oh, let's have a dialogue, let's have a conversation. Meanwhile, they hold all the power. These communities had to fundraise for years to be able to fly to Toronto to finally meet with the person who has controlled the taking of their land, the polluting of their rivers for the last 10 years. And it's not a moment. They can have a conversation then, but to act like this is a space for meaningful dialogue when the CEO can sort of take a picture, put it on their website, look, we had this meaningful meeting with these people, and then they go home and their lives aren't improved. That's, I would say, a farce of a dialogue. And that's when that can be used to continue exploitation. So I think it's right to be critical and to bring up some of the concerns Maxine is raising about where is it appropriate and where is it hiding further violence. Those are two examples that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll add too, just thinking about sort of organizing 101 training, not necessarily in a war zone, but just thinking as sort of an activist and these different tactics is kind of the ladder of escalation that we're taught. And I do feel sometimes people will jump to a confrontational tactic first, like, of course, in everyone's mind, let's do a rally or let's do a sit-in or something. So one thing I guess just to throw into this conversation is thinking through that toolbox of tactics that you have at your disposal, maybe starting out with the conversation, whether it is with your elected official, a CEO, or whoever that quote unquote target is in your campaign. And then, we often talk about it sort of gauging the response and then escalating appropriately from there and using other, in our case, always nonviolent tactics, but other tactics as appropriate.
And I think that the dialogue that could be useful is to bring the dialogue into our own communities about the issue that's happening there, right? Like I would say 90% of the folks out there probably in my little neighborhood here probably don't know the injustices that are happening right now, right? And I feel like it would be my position to be able to discuss it with them to where they are more aware of where their tax dollars are going and what role America plays in this Israel-Palestine atrocity.
I just wanted to throw in the concept of deciding that the strategy for your dialogue, to change your definition of success. It may be, or to just be aware of what your what you define as success. Why are you, what is your intention for the dialogue? Is it to change someone's mind? Is it to create understanding? Is it to just get information to the right place or to find out information? And being clear about what your intention is, I think will put some more clarity around what happens with that dialogue and whether or not that's an appropriate place for the dialogue.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Betsy. I'm going to transition us a little bit to the concept of service we were talking about earlier. I want to come back to that a bit because that is something that comes up a lot in our conversations at World Beyond War. One of our pillars is promoting a culture of peace and needing to transform away from a culture of violence and militarism, especially in the West and the US, but globally as well. And so this notion of, how can we redefine service and not just include military service, but, farming, for example. I'm also a farmer, so wearing my farming hat, there's a movement within young farmers to try to get farming designated as a public service in the United States, which would allow student debt forgiveness. And then, there's also conversations, right, with the pandemic. We saw kind of a redefining or an opening up of the definition of service, talking about frontline workers and nurses, and that was really exciting. And I think many of us in the anti-war pro-peace movement saw that as a possible opening, and to use messaging about, well, imagine what we could do if we redirected military spending towards healthcare and all these other needs. So this is obviously a big question. It's about a cultural shift, but wondering if any of you have thoughts about how we can broaden that definition of service and start to make that cultural shift.
Well, Dan used to tell me that we have to get you a uniform, he'd say, because we would go places and people would thank him for his service. And he got to where he was pretty uncomfortable, like, what about her service? And I think we have to understand that everybody serves the community in some way, whether we understand that or not. And, it's one of the things I learned from my husband. When we go out to eat, the waitress comes and says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm going to take your order. How are you doing?" And he says, "Well, how are you doing? What's your story? Who are you?" To make that connection. And I think we have to understand that we have to sort of cultivate this idea of gratitude toward everybody's service in a way that we recognize it. And, even like people in the peace movement, I know, are unable to say thank you for your service to a veteran. And Garett, it may or may not mean anything to some veterans, but until we're able to thank everybody for their service, whatever reason that veteran chose to serve, they did choose to serve. Then I don't think we can expect it to come back to us as thanking us for our service either. It kind of goes both ways. I learned a lot about service and about teamwork and about not leaving people behind and supporting each other from the veterans that I know and that I've worked with. And I think we can all take a lesson from that, and understand that we all have things that deserve gratitude, and we can, it's a simple thing that we can say today, I'm going to thank people for serving me and my community and ideals that are important to me and others. So I think we can all do that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about almost like you need to wear a uniform to like gain that respect, because that's actually, we've had some conversations, not about uniforms per se, but just the notion of like, we need to almost like formalize like a Peace Corps. I know there's a Peace Corps, but like a real Peace Corps doing nonviolent action in the face of war, whatever you want to call it, but like something more formalized that would garner that level of respect that you're saying, that people would take it seriously and that would even, we've talked about, because we do some work like nonviolent action in the face of war, and we have some folks who are thinking about or who have been to Ukraine and are looking at that situation, and thinking about like how can people take this seriously and like be willing to put their life on the line the way that a military soldier does for nonviolent action. And do we need to kind of create like a formalized structure, a uniform, whatever that means, to kind of raise it to that level?
And I think culture shifts are hard and slow, and it really has to be intentional, right? And for us, like as a common man, a common person, we really need to address it in our day-to-day, like Betsy said, right? It's about being grateful. It's about how we are parenting our kids and telling them who the heroes are and who the heroes aren't. It's about the language that we use. I sometimes reflect on like how violent our own language is, right? Where I just killed that performance, or that was the mom, like stuff like that. I think these intentional little things that we can really implement in our day-to-day, that's where the culture shift will happen. From the movies we watch to the games we play, everything. And we really need to reclaim that narrative of what a true public servant is. And we need to redefine who a hero is, right? Because I feel like, in the past and even now, like they had the war movement has claimed that term, and I think it's way broader than anything that they come up with.
I think it's rare for folks to serve each other anymore. I talk to a lot of classrooms about my military experience doing counter recruitment, truth and recruitment efforts, and the view of service has changed a lot. I think the trajectory of being in a capitalist nation for so long has exponentially made it more and more difficult, where it's not seen as a value to serve one another anymore, and you find it hard to even see within families and friendships people serving each other in true altruistic goals, to where they're not gaining anything in return. So yeah, real service is it's amazing, it's genuine, and it's fantastic if it's coming from a place from love and want to build a stronger community. I can't say my service to my country was honestly serving in any individuals or communities. I feel like I was serving military corporations like Lockheed Martin and oil executives and individual ambitions of politicians. If they thanked me for my service, I would think that was coming from a genuine place. But I don't think I made my nation safer. I don't think I helped my family members, or I don't think I made my community any safer. I think it actually probably did the opposite by putting more hate in the world and bringing violence back upon them, by making, by weakening our economy, by all the reasons, growing economic divide, growing social divides. I probably did more harm as a service member. So I feel like every day as a peacemaker, I'm doing way more service than I ever have as a soldier. As a soldier, I gain moral injury for my service, and in activism, I'm repairing my moral injury through service. So the weight of one versus the other, at least in my opinion, and in my heart, is very, very different. So I hope that we could all come to a place where we're serving each other again. That would be a fantastic society. And as was said, changing culture, Saadia said it's slow, but we need to use cultural tools. And I think you're doing that. What builds a culture? It's our food, it's our stories, it's our songs, it's our rituals. All of these are cultural things, and if we can change those cultural things, we can change our culture. If we start celebrating Armistice Day again rather than celebrating Veterans Day, we could change our culture. But we have to intentionally create these things within our family structures, with our communities, to be able to start making those changes. And once it becomes reoccurring, and once it becomes a tradition within our communities, then our culture is starting to change.
Absolutely. And that's what we're doing. As you said, we're doing it right now with this film, with the film festival. We are telling these stories, and we hope that everyone tuning in is inspired and will then take these films and take these stories and share them in their communities too. And I want to kind of dial down. We've talked about very broad concepts, movement building, difficult concepts. Dial down, Betsy, to you to tell us specifically about what happened to the peace sign. You know, I think it's a really incredible story. I think it's humorous as well throughout the way as we see the activists for decades repainting the sign and just the whole controversy that was created just by this symbol. And I've heard rumors, I think it's reassembled at this point. So I'd love to hear what happened to the sign and more broadly to kind of how those relationships that were started between the veterans and the peace community, how those are going today.
Well, the rumors are true. The sign is reunited. Actually, it happened in 2021, which was the year, it was the year I retired. It was kind of the last thing I did as director. And interestingly, it was 20 years exactly from the time that the sign came down. So for us, that was important. It's put in on a wall behind the Peace Center. So it was important that it not be on the hill necessarily or in people's face, that we didn't go through all of this community work for nothing, but still in a place that would honor the sign for its value to those that had history with it and importance around the sign. So it's back behind the Peace Center. There's been several events there. People go there for selfies and whatnot. It's a pretty popular place for the community to go to now. So we're happy about that. Interestingly, when we were putting it together, more controversy, right, over peace. There were some that wanted to repaint the whole thing and start over, just paint it and then start a new peace sign on it. And others that were like, no, it's iconic value the way it is. It's got bullet holes and it's got some of the pink sludge that the fire retardant that was sprayed on it, and it has places where people have written other things on top of it and erased it, and all of that is history and it's important. And so we ended up deciding to keep it that way. But it was, again, a large conversation with people that felt strongly on both sides. So the commitment to peace keeps giving, I think. It keeps presenting those opportunities to kind of come together. Unfortunately, Dan passed away in 2016, and the American Legion Post 101 that he started is no longer in service in the community. And so the Veterans Day events are not happening as they were. Dan kind of opened it up to be more of a community event that honored all of the people that call this place home, rather than just glorifying war and veterans. And I think that is more what that celebration on November 11th has turned into in the community as a result of Dan and the Post 101 no longer being part of it. I will say that several of the relationships that happened between me and veterans and the Peace Center continue. And even just like 6 or 7 months ago, someone came through Missoula because they'd seen the film and they purposely wanted to come through and see the center, see the sign, meet me, meet Dan, which unfortunately they couldn't, but it continues to ripple out. The work that Jan did an amazing job on the film, and people continue to see it, and they continue to take it into their own lives. I think I've heard so many stories about people that were inspired to approach a veteran or approach someone on another different divide from them and have a conversation and start opening the door. So I think that work continues on so many levels, and happy to have been part of it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, the film is an inspiration, and just, we see little snippets of your organizing work and your team there, having those board meetings, having those conversations, gathering feedback from the community, and then now hearing that you've done that once again with this whole conversation of putting it up again, and just that kind of, feedback process that we can see being done. I think that's a great inspiration. And yeah, go ahead, Betsy.
I also wanted to add, I'm not the director anymore at the center, but they are continuing the work that I think is important to peace. They have some new board members that they've reached out to from the Native community around Missoula, and are trying to build some conversation and some understanding between the tribal areas and the Peace Center and the Peace community, because many Native communities felt left out in so many ways from that. So other populations, there are many other divides that we can cross, and hopefully we'll continue to find those and cross them together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And seeing lots of positive feedback in the chat, people saying, wow, great compromise, Betsy. I'm coming to Missoula after seeing this film. So we're just about up with the time. We have about 10 minutes left. So I think we're going to transition to the last question, which is, I think this film is especially relevant in today's times, which seem increasingly polarized and divisive, especially from a US perspective, but maybe other countries are feeling this as well. And so we want to go to each of you with one suggestion that you can leave us with of how we can try to overcome these divides in today's hyper-partisan world and grow our movement for peace. So whoever wants to start us off.
Oh, I'll start. One of my favorite quotes is from Joseph Campbell: "Where you stumble, there's your treasure." And I think for many of us, we see disagreement, a divide as stumbling, and it's frightening, and we back up from it. I think in the films, in the first film, Gandhi made some statement about choosing to be free. You have to choose to move forward in that. And in the second film as well, and Dan and I, we made the choice to go beyond the divide, and not stay where we were stumbling. And I think that that's really important. You have to let go of being right, let go of what you know, and be willing to go to the place where you meet someone one-on-one with where they're at. As Garett said, we meet where we are and recognize our common humanity.
So one of the things that resonates with me, and that's something that Preemptive Love really pushes, is what is our posture and what is our position, right? So we believe that anybody can have any position on anything, left, right, up, down, whatever, right? But how are we showing up? What is our posture when we enter a conversation, right? Our physical posture is one thing, like, are we coming in with our hands crossed, or are we coming with our open hands? And our mental posture, right? Are we there to convert people? Are we there to listen? Are we there to understand? Are we there to have empathy for one another as we listen to our stories? And how we approach each person and we hear their stories is what we feel like is the road to peace.
I think all we need to do is have a documentary team film us and create a movie about us. Seemed to work for Betsy and Dan.
Dan, are you still out there?
I think the movie was great. We've kind of answered this question throughout the whole panel, and it was just a delight to be part of it and an honor to be with all of you. So thanks for watching the film and sharing it with me, and thanks for inviting me to this thing.
Thank you to all of you, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Rachel to close us out.
Thank you so much, Greta, and especially thank you to our incredible panelists, Betsy, Saadia, and Garett. Deeply appreciate the time you've given us today and just the thoughtfulness and the heartfulness that you brought to this conversation. And thank you to the audience who I feel also showed up with that same thoughtfulness. I hope folks did have a chance and you can still do so to read some of the comments in the chat. There's a lot of great sharing and stories in there. And that's a wrap for our third annual film festival. This year, of course, we're celebrating Stories of Nonviolence was our theme. We'll send out an email with the links to the recording from today, but also from all 3 days of the Film Fest discussions. We're thrilled that this year's event ended up being truly global. We had speakers and over 200 audience registrants from over 18 different countries. So thank you to everyone who attended. And please save the date for World Beyond War's annual No War 2023 conference online from September 22nd to 24th. So that lines up with the International Day of Peace. We have been just so struck by the power of the theme of this film festival, the power of nonviolent resistance. So we're actually going to be holding our annual conference to continue that same theme. So if this was of interest to you, we hope you'll be able to join us then. Stay tuned for updates. And of course, you can always learn more about our work and ways to get involved at WorldBeyondWar.org. So again, thank you again to everyone and have a great afternoon or evening or night, depending on where you are. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.